Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable President of the Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangye, Professor Anand Kumarji, Secretary for the International Relations Wing of Department of Information and International Relations, Kong Sunam Nubudakula, Mrs. Sondi Ji, Professor Siddiq Wahid, Major General Vinod Segal, Raghvendra Rao, a lot of friends, a very special guest, Kasur Tembala, a representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama based in Delhi, Kongo Ngutupla, Additional Secretary of DIR, Chimi Tsiangla, Secretary of Tibet Bureau based in Delhi, Siring Thuntupla, the Executive Director of Indo-Tibetan Coordination Office, Kamar Thagila, members of the press, and our dear friends. Thank you all for coming, and I wish you all a very warm and a hearty welcome to the book launch and the discussion that will follow after that. Friends, today, as in when we speak here, we are gathered here on a very important day, October 29. If you ask us why we chose this day was particularly designed in such a way that we wanted to do the report launch and the discussion today, because right now, at this very point in time, in Fujian province in southeast China, there is this large congregation called the World Buddhist Forum, the 5th in the series, taking place. We managed to look up the agenda, and the agenda that tops the list is how Buddhism can be used to further China's economic imperialism, or rather, to put it very clearly, Belt and Road and Buddhism, China's maritime Silk Route projects and Buddhism. So that's being discussed in China right now at this very moment. The forum began yesterday and will run till tomorrow. Today, at this very moment, the Central Tibetan Administration, who is the legitimate moral representative of Tibetan people inside and outside of Tibet, is hosting a very important event, the report launch of a trilingual publication titled, as you can see up here on the board, Tibet was never a part of China, but the middle way approach remained a viable solution. So this book, we keep calling it the flagship publication of CTA, the reason being that it's produced in 3 languages, Tibetan, English, and Chinese. And this book seeks to counter, at the same time challenge, China's misinformation or disinformation on anything relating to Tibet, as China seeks to cloud the world's view on the true prevalent situation inside Tibet. It is the moral and the legitimate responsibility of the CTA to dispel the truth, to tell the world the true narrative of what is happening on the Tibetan plateau, China's policies, and what the international community can do about it. So today's report launch is significant on a lot of aspects, given the fact that we live in an increasingly competitive world where information communication technology has taken center stage. And if at all there's one area where China has not taken over yet, it's the information battleground. And I think it's the CTA's narrative, the Tibetan people's narrative, that has successfully been established over the last 60 years and will go on until there is a resolution to the Tibet issues. So friends, without further ado, we will begin with the report launch. I would like to request Honorable Dr. Lobsang Sangye, Professor Anand Kumar, my colleague Sonam Nubudakula to kindly do the honors. Thank you very much, friends. I now have the pleasure and the honor to invite the Honorable President of Central Tibetan Administration, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, a man I think would not need any introduction from my end, a globally recognized figure, I think one of the most important spokesperson for the Tibetan cause after His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'd like to invite Dr. Sangay to kindly convey the welcome address.
Welcome everybody. As you all know, the title of the book clearly says Tibet was never part of China, but middle way remains a viable option. We chose this topic for a couple of reasons. Some of you might know about the middle way approach of Central Tibet administration. The middle way approach was envisioned by His Holiness Dalai Lama and unanimously adopted by the Tibetan Parliament exile, and it is our policy to address or solve the issue of Tibet peacefully through dialogue. What we seek is genuine autonomy as per the Chinese constitution and to remain within China. But over the last 2 or 3 decades, sometimes there's a bit of a confusion or a narrative that when you seek genuine autonomy as per middle way approach, it seems that we are asking for a favor from the Chinese government or asking for something that we didn't have. But this book makes it very clear the middle way approach is a compromise, is an olive branch from our side to the Chinese government. Because Tibet was an independent country, and we don't have to go far. The Treaty of 821-23 makes it very clear that it says Tibetans will be happy in the great land of Tibet, Chinese will be happy in the great land of China, signed by the representative of the Tibetan emperor and the representative of the Chinese emperor. So Tibet, as an independent country, was clearly established and recognized by none other than the Chinese government then, and continues to do so, continued till 1951. When we signed the 17-point agreement, which was signed under duress, as per international law, which was void ab initio, because we had to sign that agreement, otherwise the invasion was going to happen. So the 821-23 treaty and then 17-point agreement are the only 2 documents where you have signatures of both the Chinese representative and Tibetan representative. And in 17-point agreement, again, Chinese government did promise genuine autonomy more than what is there in the Chinese constitution presently. But again, it was never implemented. There was clear violation. And then, as we all know, His Holiness Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans had to flee and seek refuge in India. So in all the 13 papers, white papers published by the Chinese government, clearly claim that Tibet was turned into a socialist paradise after the occupation of Tibet. That Tibetans are master of their own region. That's their claim. Now, through this report, we want to make it very clear that Tibet is not a socialist paradise. Tibetans are not master of their own region. In fact, human rights violation, denial of religious freedom, environmental destruction, all are taking place to the extent that 152 Tibetans have committed self-immolation. They have burned themselves to protest the occupation of Tibet and to state that the repression of Tibetans are unbearable. Hence, through this report, we want to counter the claim that Tibet is not a socialist paradise and Tibetans are not the master of their own region. Rather, the Han Chinese Communist Party members are the key power holder. Third thing is, here we have also about religious freedom and reincarnation. And oddly today, in the World Buddhist Congress that the Chinese government has sponsored, is being held in China, one of the main themes is to discuss about the middle path, a concept in Buddhism. But in Tibet, the denial of religious freedom is pretty clear. The destruction of Larungar Monastery, where 3 nuns committed suicide, and the destruction of Yachengar Monastery, a nunnery, are still taking place. And now the Chinese government is making claim that they have the final authority on the reincarnation of Tibetan lamas. So there was a document in 2007, they formalized in 2008, and the practice of registration of any reincarnated lama in, at the district level of the Communist Party office will be recognized as the reincarnated lama. Now that's odd, because if you look at the track record of the Chinese government in Tibet, 98% of Tibetan monasteries and nunneries were destroyed, 99.9% of monks and nuns were disrobed, and denial of religious freedom continues even today. With that kind of background, how can they say that we will recognize the religious figures of Tibet? So Chinese government has no credibility at all to have any say on reincarnation. And as we all know in the news, that the Vatican has signed an agreement with the Chinese government about the recognition of bishops, which we find it a bit disturbing in the sense, if the agreement is true, if Vatican is willing to agree that the bishops endorsed or appointed by the Communist Party of China will be the bishops endorsed or accepted by Vatican, that means Vatican is delegating or authorizing the Chinese government to recognize not just bishops, but religious leaders. By extension, Chinese government can say, now Vatican has endorsed our authority to recognize bishops. By the same authority, or by the extension, we can also recognize reincarnated lamas and imams and so on and so forth. So that we find it very disturbing. And with this report, we want to make it very clear, as far as reincarnation of lamas are concerned, the tulkus, or the reincarnation, was in a way invented or started by the Tibetan Buddhist world. So as per our tradition and customs and spiritual based experience, the sole authority of reincarnation should remain with Tibetan lamas and no one else. And Chinese government, and for that matter, the Communist Party of China, has no role whatsoever. Having said that, what we propose is a compromise. Hence, middle way approach remains a viable option. And I hope the Chinese government will accept the fact that the repressive policies of the Chinese government is not working in Tibet. In the last 60 years, the second and third generation of Tibetans continue to take part in various forms of protest, spiritual, cultural, linguistic, environmental matters, sending a clear message that the present system and repression is unacceptable, and we, the Tibetans, should be granted an autonomy for the Tibetan people. I hope the Chinese government will get the message, and there will be dialogue between the envoys of the Dalai Lama and representatives of the Chinese government to solve the issue of Tibet peacefully. So that is the idea behind publishing this report. And I just want to thank all the I think, around 18 authors and editors, because we have in English, Tibetan, and Chinese. So all the 18 authors and editors were working so hard for many, many months to make this report possible. And personally, I would like to thank my friend, Laura Zimmerman, who took a lot of time to edit this report, the English version, for her contribution as well. So thank you very much for coming. And hopefully, you know, the expert, the professor, longtime friend, Professor Anand Kumar, will enlighten you more about this report and the idea behind this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lobsang Sangye, for essentially summarizing the essence and the significance of this report. As Dr. Sangye said, I mean, there are 9 chapters, and each chapter could have been a book in itself, but we tried to make this as the most comprehensive report, I think, would say ever available on the case of Tibet. So it's a must-have for everyone who is interested in knowing about Tibet and supports the Tibet cause. And 2 things I want to flag up here right now is the English version of this report is now available for download on Tibettv, which is the maiden web news site of the Central Tibetan Administration. So the ebook is now downloadable on www.tibettv. Second thing I want to say is we have an entire crew from Dharamsala working for Tibettv, headed by the director Namgil Sewang, who is streaming this entire discussion live on Tibettv on a Facebook page, and will later be incorporated into a YouTube page as well. I would now like to invite Professor Anand Kumar, a very dear friend of Tibetans, someone who's been involved with the cause for more than 25 years. I think Dr. Anand's resume, if I were to read it out, I think I would need like 5-10 minutes. So in a summary, he is a socialist, an educationist, a political reformer, and a very important voice in today's India and in today's world. So over to you, Professor Anand.
Friends, it is a very important moment for the concerned citizens of India, China, Himalayan part of the world, and every Tibetan in different parts of the world. Because as we heard, very clear voice from Tibet in the form of the introduction of this book and the context of this documentation and the purpose of this launch from Kolon Tripa. It is clear that the Tibetan reality is a mirror for all those who believe that the Chinese model of either socialism or nation building or internationalism is a failed model. It has created a lot of tears, a stream of blood, and it is not only the Buddhists, but the whole belief system in the biggest component of humanity, which is the Chinese part, is suffering. For us, we are part of the problem and part of the solution. Indians were led by a great team of freedom fighters who thought that freedom is the essence of 20th century, particularly after the Second World War. And we believe that the Chinese Revolution will be emancipatory, will be respecting history, culture, as well as the future needs of a world without violence and war. But we were found to be too optimistic. Our understanding in 1949 to 59 was totally demystified in 1962. And Indian shame is connected with the Chinese aggression of 1962. And since 1962, we have taken the Dalai Lama and his understanding as our roadmap, the bottom line for creating an understanding of the objective realities of Himalayan Asia. I have come here with the best wishes of people of India for the Tibetan quest for justice and dignity. It is an example of great moderation of the Buddhist kind, where truth may be on your side, but with the spirit of compassion and humanism, you want to bring everybody on board, including those who have been denying the truth and promoting falsehood. We have heard the Dalai Lama many times, and one of the essential messages of Dalai Lama has been, please keep a distance from hating anybody. Chinese are also victim of the circumstances, particularly the political leadership of China has a worldview which may not be sanctioned by the people of China. So please do not hate Chinese as such. Do not burn Chinese flag. Do not destroy the traditional bonds of China, Tibet, and India. And it has been very perplexing for us because it sounded like Gandhi, who said, I have no scope for foreign rule, but I cannot allow hating the British or hate-based freedom struggle, because that will only promote hate. For us who have been active with the Tibetan cause, our understanding of Tibetan situation is that it is the master key for peace in Asia and progress in the world, because largest number of the poor live in South Asia. Hunger and disease is concentrated in South Asia despite our democratic revolutions. Why? Because of the Chinese aggressive politics, which began with Tibet and is now encompassing the whole map of the world system. But for us, Tibet is the beginning of the solution of historical challenge of fight for a peaceful tomorrow. And that's why we have been saying freedom of Tibet, security of India. Tibet ki azadi, Bharat ki suraksha. And we have learned this lesson through great failures of our statesmen since the days of Jawaharlal Nehru. We have been taught by Sardar Patel, Acharya Kripalani, Jayaprakash Narayan, Ram Manohar Lohia, Muhammad Karim Chagla, to the most recent frontline leadership of our country, including Rabi Ray, George Fernandez, and many, many more people, that ignoring Tibetan tragedy will be living in denial. And that's why, without taking much of your time, I thank the leadership of Tibet to provide us this very authentic handbook. It has 9 chapters. It begins with the light of truth about history of Tibet as a civilizational heritage. And it ends with appeal of the world to the Chinese. And I want to conclude my own engagement with this very historical ceremony of report launch by going to the last page. And I want to draw your attention to the open letter addressed to Chinese President Hu Jintao in 2012 by the group of Nobel Peace Laureates. These are people who are peace builders. They are not nationalists. They are not anti-communist. They're not anti-Chinese at all. But they have something to make us a little more clear about what is the way out. And I read this small paragraph out of a very important letter written by Nobel Peace Laureates in 2012. The people of Tibet wish to be heard. They have long sought meaningful autonomy and chosen negotiation and friendly help as their means of attaining it. The Chinese government should hear their voices, understand their grievances, and find a non-violent solution. That solution is offered by our friend and brother, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has never sought separatism and has always chosen a peaceful path. We strongly urge the Chinese government to seize the opportunity he provides for a meaningful dialogue. Once formed, this channel should remain open, active, and productive. It should address issues that are at the heart of the current tension, respecting the dignity of the Tibetan people and the integrity of China. This call has a small subtext for Indian policymakers also. We have been living with a split personality on Tibetan issue since 1959, when His Holiness came to the land of his Guru. And since then, there has been increasing understanding and support for the Tibetan cause, the genuineness of the middle path. But there has been a stubborn resistance in the name of lesser evil. Peace with China is a lesser evil. Let us tolerate Chinese intrusion, Chinese invasion of Tibet. A day may come tomorrow or day after tomorrow when Chinese will be helped to see the path of reason, the light of truth, through our economic engagement, political engagement, and above all, studied silence. Chinese leadership has refused to learn from the tragedy of Soviet Union, from the tragedy of Great Britain. Imperialism has no future. It may hold on for a while with international factors, creating a sense of tolerance, but the lies are no replacement to truth. The world is awakened. Indian policymakers also have a paradigm shift. Our Prime Minister has been meeting Chinese Prime Minister more than any other national counterpart in last 4 years. But the ice is not melting. The frozen character of Chinese attitude towards India, Tibet, Himalaya is not changing. So the time has come to patch up between the people of India and the policymakers of India. It's a great tragedy that the books written by our diplomats after they retire from Indian Foreign Service are books of enlightenment. They tell the whole story. They help us in understanding our mistakes. But as long as they are sitting in South Block, they refuse to go on the side of truth. I think this report may be a good beginning, and you have done your job to provide the text in English and Tibetan. Now it is job of the Indian friends to produce a translation as soon as possible in Hindi and Bhoti, so that the Himalayan India can be educated about the truth of Tibet, and the policymakers who are more familiar, because the voters of the new regime are more down-to-earth Indian language-based voters, Indian media will have a little more familiarity with a Hindi report and a Bhoti report, and that may be the next responsibility for you, because the change is in the air, and I can see that this is going to be a great catalyzer for us. If anybody wants to understand Tibetan tragedy, its implications for Asia, Himalaya, India, China, now we have a book which is the latest documentation of truth. I thank you all for joining this program, and I thank the leadership of Tibet, which has maintained a great continuity with the traditions created by the previous leadership in last 50 years. Thank you again, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much, Professor Anand Kumar, for throwing enough light on this, the middle way approach. The 8th chapter, in fact, when you get a copy of the book, the 8th chapter actually, the 9th and the final chapter actually dwells on that approach, envisioned by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a leader as magnanimous and benevolent as His Holiness the Dalai Lama can only come up with an approach like that. And it has been the Central Tibetan Administration's approach for the last 21 years. And as the very title of the book suggests, this is the most viable and at this point in time, the only viable solution to resolving the long-standing Sino-Tibet issue. Thank you very much again, Professor Anand, also for telling us how important the Tibet movement and the struggle is for India and for the larger South Asian region as well. I remember a very important note by one of the authors. I'm not able to remember the writer, but what he said was, he who holds Tibet dominates the Indian subcontinent, the Himalayan pediment, the South Asia, and as well as Asia as well. So that's the strategic importance the Tibetan Plateau holds. And now you have expanded it to a wider global reach as well, the kind of impact that Tibet has. And the discussion that's going to follow after the launch will dwell more on that with four expert speakers, including Dr. Sangye, and my colleague Tilela will moderate that. So before we transition to that, I'd like to invite Mr. Sonam Nobudakpo, who is the International Relations Secretary at the Department of Information and International Relations of Central Tibetan Administration, one of the senior-most bureaucrat in the Tibetan administration establishment, and also a member of the Sino-Tibet task force who handles the Sino-Tibet dialogue as well. So I request Kongol Dakpula to convey the thank you note.
I have the pleasure of thanking all those who are involved in the compilation of this report. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Anand Kumar for being the chief guest of the launch of this report. We have 3 versions of this report in English, Tibetan, and Chinese, and many people are involved in this. And then also I would like to thank Honorable Dr. Lobsang Sangye, the President of the Central Tibetan Administration, for giving us the gist of this report. Despite his busy schedule, he agreed to be here. And on behalf of the Department of Information and International Relations, I would like to thank him. And also I would like to thank all the distinguished guests and the media. I would like to especially thank those people who are involved in compiling this report. We have 9 chapters, and one is on history. So historically, Tibet was an independent country. Now Tibet is under China, but we are not seeking separation or independence from China. We like to resolve the Tibet issue through dialogue and peaceful means, and we would like to remain under China, and we are demanding genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people within China. So basically, the report talk about the historical fact of Tibet. Tibet was an independent country before the Chinese invasion occupation. Now under the Chinese occupation, the suffering of the Tibetan people. So I don't want to deal more. Now China is following a new colonialism policy in Tibet. And now this Chinese have given a new term. It's called Chinese characteristics. So when when we talk about human rights, language rights, and all that sort of thing, you know, China comes out with a new kind of a term saying the Chinese characteristics, human rights, Chinese characteristics, democracy, Chinese characteristics. That means China don't follow the international norms of the human rights. So we have brought out the report on the violation of human rights in Tibet, specifically religious freedom, their policy which came up with reincarnations, then language rights, environmental destruction in Tibet. We also come up with the policies in the language rights. You know that if the Chinese constitution talks about giving about language rights, but in reality, if you talk about teaching of Tibetan language, then they'll be termed as separatists or seeking independence. So our report has been written by different officials of the Central Tibet administration, specifically the officials of the Department of Information and International Relations. As I said, we have 3 versions. So the English version, we have an English section who basically brought out the reports in English, and then it's being translated into Tibetan language and also in Chinese. So I would like to thank all the officials who have been involved in compiling the report in English, and then also people who are involved in translating into Tibetan language and also in Chinese. And also would like to thank those editors, as President Lobsang Sengke said, Laura, and we also have Phoenix, who edited the English version, but we have a lot of other Tibetan officials who have been involved in compiling this version. So I'd like to thank all of them. And this, as President Lobsang Sengke said, you know, it's a very comprehensive report on the situation on Tibet today. So we talk about the past history, we talk about the present situation in Tibet under the Chinese control, but we, in future, His Holiness, the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan administration comes out with the policy that we are not going to seek independence from China, but we are seeking a genuine autonomy within China if the Tibetans were given a genuine autonomy, so this has historical component, the present situation in Tibet, and the future resolution of the Tibet issue. So without taking much of your time, I'd like to thank you everyone for coming, and specifically, I also would like to thank Dr. Madhuri Sondi, who has been a very old supporter of the Tibetan people. We have Dr. Siddiq Wahid, and we also have Dr. Ishi Chudunla. So we know all of you. You have been our supporter. His Holiness the Dalai Lama always said that support for Tibet is not support for the Tibetan people, but support for justice. So you have been supporting for the justice of Tibetan people, and would like to thank you for coming. And also I would like to thank all our distinguished guests and the media people for coming and making this book launch accessible to everyone who are not here today. So before I take much of your time, I would like to thank everybody and all the officials and all the people who are involved in this. So it took a little time for us because it's a 3 version. So initially the report is in Tibetan, it's been translated into English, then also translated into Chinese. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kong Sunam Nobudakpula, for the thank you note. Before we conclude this session, I'd like to request Honorable Dr. Lobsang Sengke to give a small souvenir for Professor Anand Kumar. It's an expression of gratitude for all that you have done for the cause of Tibet, and to wish you very good luck in your future endeavors as well.